So thank you all for coming along this evening to join in this winter safety talk. My name's Ben. I'm the part-time mountain safety advisor for Mountaineering Scotland. And tonight, I just want to share with you some bits and pieces, some kind of thoughts and some tips on kind of what's going to help in making a successful and an enjoyable kind of day out in the mountains. So we'll kind of make a start. So first of all, I would like to sort of just let you know that Cotswolds Outdoors are kind of helping to support this talk and the talk that we did last week. And just to kind of show their support to you, they're giving away some prizes. So 2 lucky people this evening will win a really good quality gift voucher for the shop and online. And also we have this really cool wee stove that kind of comes in this little pouch, really kind of nice wee pocket-sized stove. And we're also going to throw in some Mountaineering Scotland goodies along with that. So some lucky winner at the end of tonight will get their name pulled out of a hat, and this will be sent to you to use for all your mountain adventures. So there you go. So thank you to Cotswolds. And also I would just like to thank you for donating some money to the Search and Rescue Dog Association. So over the 2 talks from last week and tonight, we've raised almost £1,000 for SARDA, which is just, it's great, you know, so thank you so much for willing to donate money to the team. So give yourself a round of applause and a pat in the back there. So really thank you for that one. So we'll make a start with the talk this evening. So Scotland in winter, for me, it's kind of my favorite time of year. I love the winter. It's just a magical place whenever that snow covers all the hills and mountains. It just turns it into this different place, and it's sometimes really hard to believe that you can be in Scotland whenever you get the really nice weather. And whether or not you're wanting to go out in the mountains for hill walking or for climbing, it's an amazing place to be. And you just get some fantastic views most of the time. Other times, and probably more often than not, Scotland presents you with this type of weather where you feel like you're really fighting against the elements. You're really dressed up and just having to sort of suffer it a little bit, or you're really having to pay attention to your navigation because there's just, it's complete whiteout. So Scotland does have its nice days, but it also has those really challenging days. So hopefully you can get the joke of this picture here. And I think it's just to kind of highlight a point that regardless of having days that are really nice and sunny, and whether or not the weather's kind of a little bit in the bad side, I think we as humans can easily be fooled into thinking that kind of there's no real risk on a nice day. You got the sun on your back, it's really nice and beautiful, you can see everything. And sometimes you feel a little bit complacent and a bit relaxed. She's like, oh, it's really nice, it doesn't feel like a risky day. Where on the other side, when the visibility is really poor and you're kind of all wrapped up, it feels a bit more on edge, and a bit more challenging. So I think it's just, we need to have that, what I would call that situational awareness, regardless of what the weather is like, if it's a nice day or if it's not so nice. So it's just to kind of highlight that point that, we as humans, we do get easily fooled sometimes. So tonight is kind of looking at how we can just better ourselves to sort of not be lulled into a false sense of security. So being out in the mountains, it's a risky business. You know, we put ourselves into hazardous environments and expose ourselves to risks all the time. So we just need to always kind of, yeah, again, like I said, have that situational awareness about us. So just before we kind of move on, I just want to ask a question to everyone who's here this evening. So my work colleague Helen, who's working meticulously in the background to help make this talk happen, she's just going to post up a question. It's just to ask you, the audience, what is your sort of preferred activity in the mountains? And I know some of you probably have a crossover between multiple disciplines. So I can see there's a vast majority are kind of winter walking and mountaineering, but I'm sure, yes, some of you have that crossover into maybe a different activity. So with that in mind, I just want to highlight the point that tonight's talk is more aimed at people who will be further along their journey in winter mountaineering and climbing, that you may be more of a regular winter hill walker and you're kind of out there being more active. So it's going to sort of exclude some elements for beginners and kind of move into sort of a little bit more in-depth information. So if you want to sort of pick up on last week's talk, you can watch that, and that'll sort of bring you up to speed with where this one will then sort of start, hopefully. So that's great. No, thank you for that poll there. We'll kind of move on. So I want to show you a video just that kind of relates to this idea of risk in the outdoors. So hopefully this will play for you. Sorry. So quite a nerve-wracking moment whenever I was actually on the top. This is on Ben Nevis. I was there with my camera recording this. And definitely a very nerve-wracking moment watching this person thinking, am I about to see something really bad happen here? But you can see there that this base jumper had a very successful base jump and released his parachute and all was well. But he didn't just kind of go for it on a whim. He was up there, took a long time, making sure that the conditions were really right for the day. You can see the weather's really nice. There's no wind. He's put everything in place to make sure that it's worth the risk. So he's done a lot of planning. And when he was up there, you know, he spent a lot of time just waiting to see what the weather was doing, what the wind was doing, and then made the commitment. So for us, we need to have that sort of same mentality about kind of making sure the risks are worth it. So I just want to kind of start off with a little bit of a story about kind of risk and consequence and decision making that maybe didn't lead to a positive outcome. You know, because I could sit here and tell you all these, you know, great days out and sort of experiences that myself or somebody else had and how it all went well. But I think, we learn better from listening to other people's errors and mistakes. So I just want to give you a story that happened a few winters ago with two climbers who came up from the Edinburgh, Glasgow area. If this story is about anyone in the audience, I do apologize, but I do thank you for letting me actually use it for this talk. So yeah, like I said, two climbers were on their way up to go winter climbing in Loch Nagar. There had been a good dump of snow, and this was a couple of seasons ago. So they were like, "Yes, let's get up there and let's get climbing." So there was a lot of snow. They were racing up to Loch Nagar, but because there was lots of snow, the snow gates were closed. So they had to quickly make a plan B. So they raced up the A9 and decided to head into the northern quarries of Cairngorms. And because it was their first winter route back out, they thought they could do something relatively short and abseil back down to where they were planning on leaving their bags at the base of the climb. So this is Feakle Buttress in the northern corner of Cairngorms, and the route that they wanted to do was Invernuki, which kind of runs up around that red line there. So relatively short climb. So they arrived in a little bit later than planned, and knowing that the forecast wasn't particularly great for later on in the day, I think it was forecast to get windier as the day progressed. So they got themselves to the climb, and then because it was their first climb, they were a little bit slower, so they let another party who were coming up behind them take them over because they were moving faster. And by the time they arrived at the top, it was getting a lot windier with the forecast that's coming in, and it was getting dark. So with the wind speeds kicking up, they thought, well, to abseil back down to our bags, it would be really challenging in those wind speeds. I think it was kind of forecast up to about 60 miles an hour. So they had a couple of options. They thought, we can either, make our way back down the ridge line, which can be quite technical, down climbing to get back to the bags. And those wind speeds, it probably wasn't a good idea. So they opted for traveling further on up the shorter distance to the top and making their way back down to find the top of what's called the goat track, then make their way back to their bags. Of course, their bags being at the bottom of the route, it had their head torches, it had their maps, their compasses, pretty much had all their stuff. Luckily, they had their phones on their person, so they made the decision to call mountain rescue. And they got rescued, but I mean, they were very, very cold, and it was a successful outcome. They managed to get down. So it wasn't so much about there being avalanche hazards and an abundance of snow that prevented them from doing anything. It kind of was just about bad decision making. There was lots of little things that kind of built up on top of each other to make the outcome not a great one. So I think, for us to have a really good, successful day on the mountain, it's about making consistently good decisions. But the problem, with that is with humans, we're inherently pretty bad with making good decisions or good objective decisions. So like I said in this previous story, it wasn't just kind of snow was the problem. It's kind of like a human problem. So, we need to think about how can we better ourselves to, not put ourselves into harm's way. So just looking at this idea of kind of the human factor in making decisions, and what are those things that influence bad decisions on our part? And we make them all the day. If we're heading out into the mountains, we carry excess baggage with us. And it could be anything from our attitude, how we are feeling that day, what's our objectives, ego, are we setting out to do something like a really big mountain day or a big climb or some really steep ski descent, complacency, is a big one that we kind of carry with us. Group dynamics, there's lots and lots of different ones that, influence our decision making. And I think more now, so in modern era and with kind of the abundance of social media, can really kind of have a knock-on effect on the decisions we make. And this kind of all wraps up into a subject which is called heuristics, and basically they're kind of mental shortcuts that we use every day to help filter through millions of bits of information that we kind of constantly think about and input. And some of these heuristics, you know, are useful and helpful for everyday life if we need to make quick decisions. But on the other hand, they can lead us into pitfalls and traps. And in a study in America a number of years ago, based on 600 avalanche accidents, they found that there was a common thread throughout these accidents that people were sort of falling into, and this is where this kind of idea of heuristic traps came from. So, you know, some of them, for example, might be familiarity. You've been somewhere before 100 times, and the snow in that area has never had an issue with avalanche, so why should it today? Other ones are acceptance, just kind of following the crowd. Oh, well, I'm just with the group, I'll just go along and not say anything, or I'll just enjoy my day. Commitment, and that could be based on time and money. The expert halo, so a mountain guide or someone who has loads of experience heads off up somewhere and like, well, they must know what they're doing. Tracks, this could be footprints or ski tracks, or it could be that you want to be the first person on that slope to make some amazing turns down the fresh powder or fresh snow. Social proof, looking for kind of acceptance from our peers. So there's a kind of a common thread of ones that I want to sort of highlight to everyone. And the first one is scarcity. So a number of years ago, looking at sort of the statistics from the Met Office, they kind of have seen that over the winter period, kind of with global warming, it's getting warmer, wetter, winters are becoming more fickle as a whole, and winters are maybe not as sustained as what they once were. So whenever kind of we get a patch of snow or wherever we get a dump of snow, people want to make the most of it. They want to grab that chance and get going on that snow before it disappears. And that poses a lot of problems with maybe not as a good base of snow, or kind of people getting into more kind of challenging terrain. And so scarcity is kind of one of those ones that yeah, can be a kind of a real challenge for us. And statistically, the Scottish Avalanche Information Service saw that on a low avalanche forecast day, there was almost twice as many accidents as there would be on other avalanche hazard days. I think then that was based on the fact that there was less snow and people were trying to grab any chance to get out. So another heuristic trap is this idea, this notion of commitment, and it often goes hand in hand with scarcity. So a classic example is that you've booked a trip for a weekend, you paid for the accommodation, and you've been looking forward to this trip for a really long time, and you've driven all the way up to your accommodation, and you know, regardless of the conditions, you're going to still go out regardless. And you can see here in this video, these chaps are climbing up what's called Red Gully, and it's definitely not in a climbing condition for winter. It's not an appropriate place to be in those conditions, but clearly they've made a commitment to be there, and it's probably not the best choice to make. And commitment, I think, is also increasingly becoming more fueled by this idea of FOMO. So for all those folk who know their cool abbreviations, it's the fear of missing out. And you know, I think we all are very jealous creatures by, you know, sitting in the office looking at all these other people on social media, looking at all their amazing photographs of all the conditions, you know, and it's kind of just fueling your fire to want to get out there, you know, because you're missing out on those opportunities. So it's we'll move on. The other one is social proof. So looking to other people for kind of reassurance that you're doing the right thing, and asking questions online. And this is all very well and good. You know, there is certain kind of elements to this that kind of that work, but you might get blinkered into looking at this advice from social media as kind of gospel truth, and like, that's the information that I want, that's the information that I need to justify going out, rather than looking at the actual fact-based information that, you know, the forecast for the weather and the avalanche actually tell you. You know, so we're very susceptible to all these, you know, these heuristic traps all the time, you know, and it kind of influences our decision making. So we need to think about, sorry, yes, because the other one I was going to say, yes, there, my apologies, social proof is acceptance of like footprints in the snow. You think, oh, great, you know, if these footprints are heading off, then they must be going the right way, but you need to be careful where they're disappearing off to. So if we have all these these problems of, you know, human factors that influence our decision making and potentially lead us down kind of that rabbit hole of bad choices and poor decisions, we need to have something that's going to help us. We need to have a solution. And just like airline pilots would have a solution to make sure that whenever they fly, everything is 100% safe. So they have a checklist and something to follow before they even take off. And we've got this fantastic checklist, which is the Be Avalanche Aware process. And hopefully folk have all seen this. If you haven't, then it's a really useful app you can get for your phone. It was developed by the Scottish Avalanche Information Service back in 2013, just to help us make more objective assessments and informed decisions about having a safe day in the mountains. And if you're not too familiar with it, the way it works is you have 3 stages. You've got your planning, you've got your journey, and then key places, which is basically anywhere on the mountain on your journey that you need to make an appropriate decision about what's happening around you, what you're doing, and what the landscape is like. And then during each of these aspects, you need to think about 3 things. So the little kind of snowflake is basically weather. The little people are you and the group that you're with, and maybe the skills and experience that you carry. And then the little mountain is the landscape that you're intending to visit. So we're kind of going to run through kind of elements of this to kind of hopefully get you to think about how you plan and how you make more informed decisions when you're out in the mountains. So you might come up with lots and lots of plans based on the weather forecast and the area that you want to go. It might be a particular Munro or a Corbett or a particular climb that you want to go and do. So you might have different plans, but the plan that, you know, should top all these plans, regardless of the plans that you make, your #1 plan is to come home safe. That is kind of plan A. Every other plan that you have should then kind of come underneath that. You know, there's no point in having all these amazing plans and then potentially making a bad decision and getting into trouble. So yeah, come home safe is plan A. So thinking about where you might go and get that information to plan a day out, Walk Highlands is a great starting point. It has every Munro, Corbett, every walk you could think of within Scotland. It's going to help you have a starting point. And then thinking about, once you've got your plan, where do you go to get the weather? So you might have Mountain Weather Information Service, which is a good broad overview of a mountain area that will kind of generally forecast for about 900 meters, because that's kind of, you know, thinking about where Corbetts and Munros, you kind of start from that range. And then Met Office, a bit more mountain specific. You can sort of type in the actual mountain you want to go climb and get the weather forecast for that area. So the real key thing to look out for in winter, whenever you're looking at a forecast, is the wind. The wind is the deal breaker. It will make or break your day, because it's obviously the big influencing factor that's going to move snow around the mountain as well. So it's worth really paying attention to the wind speeds. Obviously, other influence influences and factors in the forecast is going to judge what your day is going to be like: cloud cover, poor visibility, etc. But hopefully you've got the skills to be able to navigate your way around the mountain. The wind will really challenge you, so pay attention to the wind. Just thinking more specifically about the wind, I think the Met Office is really good. It gives you different wind speeds at different elevations. So like looking at Glen level, you might think the wind isn't too bad, but once you start to get higher in the mountains, that wind is really going to influence how you progress up in the mountains. But looking at these facts and figures, it's quite hard sometimes to judge, well, how strong is a particular wind speed? So we've got a wee quiz here. So I'm going to show you a video, and a question will follow afterwards. So yeah, a wee poll question is going to pop up, and you just have to try and guess the wind speed. Okay, so if you had said 50 miles an hour, you'd have been right. So that day was a really, really bad day. Really hard to actually kind of walk anywhere in a straight line. And the elevation that we were at there on that day was probably only about 500 meters. So it was, you can imagine what it'd be like another 400 meters higher. So a friend of mine always tells me, and I always kind of smile about this, is that if you think of wind speed in terms of having some alcohol, so if you think every 10 miles an hour of wind is like having a pint of Guinness, so that's 50 miles an hour. For me, certainly having 5 pints of Guinness, I wouldn't be able to walk in a straight line, especially if somebody were to put me outside with a big heavy rucksack on, mountaineering boots, and then say, right, off you go, walk in a straight line. It would be very challenging. And it depends on person's height, build. Someone who's maybe quite short. My wife's only 5 foot. She's very tiny. 50 mile an hour winds for her, I don't think she'd stand up at all. Where I'm definitely managing, but thinking really challengingly. It's really challenging how to actually walk in those conditions. So kind of thinking about this Be Avalanche Aware process and thinking about those 3 stages, we have the planning stage, the journey that we do, and then those key places, key questions or points where we need to think about. Looking at the planning stage, which we're kind of discussing at the minute, we're looking at where we want to go, maybe by using the Walk Highlands to pick a particular mountain. And then we've looked at kind of the forecast and what it's doing in terms of the wind, and thinking about how we need to be prepared for that. And then you can see these chaps here in this video, they certainly look prepared to be out in that winter environment. They've got good Gore-Tex jacket on, or something that's going to protect them from all the elements. Gloves, their maps and compasses are kind of look, are neat and tidy. They're quite small and neat to shove in a pocket. Ski goggles on just to protect from all the wind-blown snow around. So they look the part. They look like they're meant to be there. So that's the things we need to think about in our planning stage based on what the weather is like, and then what we need to sort of carry with us when we're out in the mountains. And they look like they're certainly managing in those wind conditions. I think that's probably about 30 miles an hour in this video. Just thinking about technology and how we carry it more and more now, and it's becoming more of a readily available thing. Certainly smartphones and the use of free apps such as OS Locate or Outdoor Active, which used to be View Ranger. They're really useful additions to the ability to use a map compass. They're certainly not something to rely on 100% because they're only as good as the battery, and batteries don't like the cold. They'll just completely die. But it certainly is something to bear in mind to have as an addition to helping you navigate around the mountains. And watches now, they help with giving you altitude and being able to sort of track your journey, and having some sort of GPS emergency signaling device such as like a spot device or some sort of Garmin, which are really handy pieces of equipment. I use Garmin quite a lot, but it does require a subscription. But technology is there. It's so readily available. I think it's one of these things that's now certainly catching up to be part of our navigating in the mountains. But bear in mind that just because we have all of this equipment and we're prepared doesn't necessarily make us safer. Just like driving a car, if you've got your winter tires on, doesn't mean you can drive faster in snowy, icy conditions. You still have to drive to the conditions that are presented to you. Just like this little mouse has got his helmet on, doesn't make him safer from that mouse trap. So we just need to kind of bear that in mind, that it's all about making these good decisions to avoid putting ourselves in dangerous situations. And again, just thinking about this idea of being the part and looking like we're meant to be in the mountains, the wise words of Shrek, wearing lots of layers are definitely the key to staying warm and being able to regulate your temperature in the mountains when you're out there, rather than having one big chunky layer on. So here's a question for you. In this picture, have a guess as to how many pieces of clothing I'm wearing. So Helen should hopefully bring up a wee question there for us. Yeah, so if you said 6, yes, well done. I'm wearing 6 pieces of clothes. So the hat is 1, then the yellow jacket, then the Gore-Tex, and then I've got a big kind of belay jacket, big warm one on the outside, and then there's 2 more layers underneath. So that was a pretty miserably cold day that day, but lots of layers help to regulate that temperature much better. And again, just thinking about, what else do we carry with us in the mountains to look after ourselves and keep ourselves safe? So you might have, an extra warm synthetic jacket rather than down. Down just gets wet and clumpy and just doesn't work in the wet. Lots of gloves to look after your hands, just in case a pair gets wet or one blows away. And then maybe a big pair of burly mitts as an emergency. And then certainly this time of year, a head torch is an absolutely essential piece of equipment. And then maybe a first aid kit And then lots of dry bags to put everything into, just to help compartmentalize everything. Because no matter how good your rucksack is, snow will get in there. You know, find wee nooks and crannies and holes when it's blowing a gale, and it will just get everything wet. So lots of dry bags, just to keep everything neat and tidy and dry. That's the key thing. Yeah, so you can see there, warm hat, spare gloves, jacket, first aid kit, head torch, some walking poles maybe. If you've got kind of sore knees or just kind of want to help with a bit of balance when it's a wee bit windy, you know, they're great, so they are. What we wear on our feet, I would certainly say that if you're out in the mountains, that these micro spikes are definitely not the choice of footwear. They're about as useful as a chocolate fire log. So definitely something to avoid when you're up in the mountains. These things are good for when it's icy tracks, low down, or you need to nip to the shops when it's really icy on the ground. But traveling around in winter mountains, they're definitely not the footwear of choice. And there was an incident a couple of winters ago in the Araka Alps, and the people were absolutely fine. They were definitely dressed comfortably, but just the choice of footwear they had wasn't appropriate for the conditions that they were in and the terrain that they found themselves on. They just didn't work. So you need to have the right equipment for the right conditions, and this kind of high heel shoe definitely isn't appropriate footwear. So just bear in mind, you need to have that right equipment. And then if it all goes a wee bit wrong, you know, you need to sort of have that emergency backup. So those little £5, £6 bivy bags are an absolute lifesaver. Just lives at the bottom of your bag. Or if you want to use it to slide down the mountain back home really quickly, then they're great. And then maybe something a bit more of an investment is like a group shelter. Again, just helps to keep you out of the wind, and it's a real morale booster just to get into if the wind's really bad. And then just kind of thinking about those emergency aspects, you know, what do you do if you need to call someone to get that help, and the process that you go through? You know, you'd obviously go for 999, and then you're going to ask maybe for the police then, because the mountain rescue will always work through the police. And if you've maybe got very low battery and it's hard to try and get a phone signal out, you can always use the emergency text service, which allows you to send out a text message to the emergency services. Very simple to do. You just follow the prompts when you text the word registered to 999, and it allows you to get a text message out, because it requires less effort and signal to get a message out. So if we're heading out into the mountain environment, whether it's for a hill walk or out ski touring, whatever it is, if the weather's nice or if the weather's pretty bad, we need to think about avalanche and the avalanche conditions and hazards that come with that. You know, they're the real problematic things that we're putting ourselves in that environment where those risks are. So we need to look now at how do we go about making good decisions to avoid putting ourselves into avalanche territory. So just for kind of definition, what is an avalanche? It is a massive snow that moves downhill. That's it. That's the kind of basic definition. It's a massive snow that gets moved down a hill, but it needs particular things to cause it to move downhill, and that's what we'll look at. So how does an avalanche happen? It happens from a starting point, and then it has a place where it'll flow down the mountain, and then it'll have an area at the bottom where it'll stop and deposit. So it has a point of origin and that transition and then the deposition zone, and it'll just flow downhill. Just to put it into context of the previous image, as to how big some of the lumps of snow that you can get are pretty colossal sometimes. And looking at the kind of the chunks of snow, it's really quite blocky in nature. This is kind of more like wind slab snow that builds up over time and breaks up in these large chunks. And in Scotland, that's kind of the most dominant type of avalanche that you get. You know, wind slab snow is kind of blown and it packs up into this kind of polystyrene type feel of snow, and it just breaks up into big chunks. But there are other associated hazards that we need to think about with avalanches. And if an avalanche were to happen, thinking about the terrain that it blows over and what else happens along that way. So other associated hazards that we have with avalanches and wind-blown snow, we have cornices, where the wind will blow over a mountain and deposit this false piece of land. Basically, you're kind of this skiers walking in air, so you need to think about that as a problem. Just put it into context how big some of these cornices can get from wind-blown snow. That's a pretty colossal cornice there. You certainly don't want to end up like poor Wile E. Coyote and come a cropper on them. So you need to be very careful about kind of paying attention to cornices, which we'll kind of look a wee bit later on. So this is a wee video just of my wife. I put her into a position of just kind of falling through a cornice. It was very small scale, but it just gives you an understanding of what they're like and what can actually happen. So you can see there the wind has kind of blown the snow one direction and created this little lip. It's very quite thin, and it almost looks like, it's actual proper hard terrain, where in fact it's just this false ground. An extra additional load has caused it to collapse. So thinking that that's quite small scale, take it to the bigger mountains, it's going to be more catastrophic. Thinking about where you might be in relation to an avalanche, you could be over some steep terrain that's challenging, and what's above you, and it can avalanche and potentially knock you over some steep terrain. Some valleys where they're not, it can flow into the valley and trap you there. So an example could be the Calamine Gap in the Cairngorms. It's a small scale valley that would be considered a terrain trap. And that's just kind of where it is on a west map. You can see this tight wee gap where it can easily sort of collect snow if it were to avalanche either side. Complex terrain, which is probably going to be most terrain that we walk on in the mountains. Run-out zones as well. It's thinking about where you are in relation to the slopes that are above you and how much snow is above you and whether or not it's got high avalanche risk. So let's look at what are the ingredients for an avalanche to happen. So there's kind of 4 ingredients that's going to make an avalanche happen. So you need a slope for snow to build up on. You need a weak or unstable layer that's underlying close to the ground. It could be a number of things. You need wind slab, which is basically wind-blown snow onto that slope. And then you need a trigger, and that trigger could be walkers, skiers, additional snow, or another kind of extra weight or load of some kind. So they're the main ingredients of what causes an avalanche. And whenever wind slab avalanches release, it's almost like taking a hammer to a pane of glass, the way it cracks. And you can see this snowboarder has released a slab of snow, and it's broken and disjointed. And it just slides down the hill. It can reach up to speeds of 80 miles an hour, depending on the size of the slope. And you just go with it. There's no getting out of it, unless maybe you might be wearing an airbag or something. But it's they're definitely a thing that you don't want to get caught up in. Another way of looking at this kind of idea of avalanches happening is like a nice sponge cake. You've got a base layer, which could be old snow with the ground, this soft, weak layer in the middle, and then this other firm layer of wind slab on top. You stick that up at a particular angle, and then that top layer is just going to slide off that weak layer in the middle. So here's a question for you. What are the ranges of angles that a wind slab avalanche is most likely to occur? So Helen's going to pop up a wee question there. Yeah, so if you said between 30 and 45, you would have been right. That's the angles that we're looking at, that most wind slab avalanches will occur. They're very rare beneath 30, and slab avalanches become a little bit more infrequent above that 45, just because snow tends to slough more, and it doesn't really have that cohesion that it needs to another layer. So that kind of optimum angle is between 30 and 45 for wind slab avalanches to occur. So something to think about in this question, what's the percentage of victims trigger their own avalanche? I'll just let you think about it for a wee second and try and think about, well, what is that percentage? So 90% of victims trigger their own avalanche, which is a colossal percentage, so that's really high. So something to think about, if we are part of the problem that creates avalanches, then we can be part of the solution to prevent ourselves from, putting ourselves in harm's way. So thinking kind of a little bit more about the scale at which, forecasters will tell us how likely it is that an avalanche were to happen, and the other things to expect, but the scale going from green up to red. Green is low, it's never no. Low is still a chance that it could happen, but generally safe travel conditions. The avalanche might occur under very certain circumstances. Right up to high, where natural avalanches will occur. If you're in somewhere that's high, you might see them, all triggering without an additional extra load. So it's really important to think about that. There is a black on an avalanche diagram, but historically in Scotland, we've never had a black. We've had sort of high, and generally considerable is kind of in that middle ground when there's a black avalanche forecast symbol there. But because we've never had it, we can get rid of it. And it kind of, then all of a sudden it puts that considerable risk up into the upper tier of risk and consequence. So something to think about is that if you were to leave your house or leave wherever you are right now, step outside, that there's a considerable chance of you getting a broken nose from somebody punching you in the face. You might not want to take that risk because it's too great. So you might need to wait for that risk to subside and disappear, or you might plan to leave your house a different way so you're not going to put yourself in that considerable risk. So kind of thinking about the Be Avalanche Aware process, we're kind of going through this planning stage. We need to look about, where do we get that information to then look at where the avalanche problems are going to be on the mountain in relation to the walk that we might want to do, the climb that we might want to do, or where we might want to ski. So the Scottish Avalanche Information Service will provide us with this forecast that has this wonderful, colourful wheel. And thinking like that wheel of fortune will only really tell us two key bits of information, and that is the aspect of a slope, whether it faces north, south, east, or west, and just the altitude as well. At what altitude are the problems starting to become more risky, whether you're transitioning from a low to moderate to considerable risk. But bearing in mind that the red circle at the altitude there is 800 meters, doesn't mean that if you're standing at 799 meters that you're completely safe. And then once you step over that 800 meter mark, you're presenting yourself into the risky hillsides. Everything's connected. So you have to kind of really think about other elements as well around you. The website for the information service they gathered some statistics a while ago and had seen that people were spending less than a minute on the forecast, and put it down to people just looking at the diagram, and then they were using that just to kind of plan their day. But that diagram only tells you two bits of information. So thinking about, do you want to go out into the mountain with 2 bits of information, or do you want to go out with as much information and knowledge as possible to make a better informed assessment and decision about what it is that's happening out there? So it's really important to pay attention to the details in their writing, because they will give you further further detail about what exactly happening to the snow, and the little symbols at the bottom will indicate if there's other underlying weaknesses that you can't observe from the diagram. And just to show you how it can change from day to day, over a 24-hour period, the snow conditions can change really rapidly based on the wind, which influences our day massively. So again, it's maybe looking at the history of what's happening the week before, you plan to head out on your day in the mountains. And another really useful key bit of information to gather is from these information blogs that the forecasters go out, walk around the mountains, do all that observation, and then write up on what they've seen to help us create a better picture. So it's really important to sort of get that information, which is fact-based. It's real-time information that's going to help make a better informed decision. So just an example of how we can apply the information from the Avalanche website is that if you're planning a day, say for example Cairngorm here, you can look at the Avalanche diagram and you can start to look at the altitudes and the aspects of where the problems might be. So you can see the ski car park's about 630. That black line is the 700 mark where there's considerable risks. And then you can start to kind of color in those aspects of the mountain that have the problematic areas. And by doing this, you start to kind of look at where what I would call the no-go areas are. And you're starting to think, right, okay, well, my options of travel are becoming less and less here. So I need to think carefully about where I can travel. And you can see here, these black lines are indicating gaps between, which are ridge lines. And ridges are really useful ways of travel. Ridges are bridges because they will get wind scarred from the wind traveling across the slopes and leaving them a bit more free. And another kind of useful tool to help in terms of technology is FatMap. So if you've ever seen this before, it's a great tool just to help look at slope angle and aspect, and it just helps kind of highlight the colors of where the problematic areas are. And you can see here, those same ridge lines are actually kind of a little bit the green side, which indicate a lesser angle in relation to all kind of the red and oranges. So it's just another additional tool for planning. And here's an example of where the wind has been traveling from, scouring all the snow off one side and depositing on the other, leaving a ridge line of safe travel. So we've talked about 3 things. We've talked about aspect, north, south, east, west, where are the problems on the mountain, the altitude, how high up the mountain are these problems, and then angle, at what steepness do avalanche problems start to occur. But looking at a OS map, it's hard to know kind of what angle is a particular angle. There's no way of knowing if that's 30 degrees, 45, blah, blah, blah. But what you can do, if you look a little bit more closely at an OS map, that if you start to see missing contours, as a rough rule of thumb, that's about a 30-degree slope. So in your planning of your day using the Be Avalanche Aware checklist, you can then start to look at the journey that you're wanting to do and see whether or not you're crossing any of these slopes that have got missing contours. So hopefully that will help you make a different decision and plan a different journey or avoid those slopes altogether. And just to put that into a bit of context, this is a slope in the Cairngorms. You can see it has had an avalanche. And if we look at that same slope, that exact same spot on an Ordnance Survey map, if you look closely, there's actually locations where the contours are missing. and that's about a 30-degree slope in that area, you know, so it's kind of, it shows that it's actually applicable and it works. So this all comes around back to, you know, all of that information is based on having a checklist to help you make better informed decisions and not kind of being lured into these heuristic traps, which we are all kind of victims of. I know I have had plenty of problems where I've looked back and realized, oh yeah, that was definitely for me one of those traps, and I completely fell for it. So at the end of the day, all you're being is a detective, and you want as much information as you can gather to make that decision better. And just something to leave you with here that's going to help you on your journey is what I would call the 3 A's and 3 W's. So the 3 A's, which we've talked about, are aspect, altitude, and angle. And on your journey, you know, if you're out in the mountains, constantly ask yourself those 3 questions about, when I'm walking, what's the aspect that I'm walking up? How high am I currently? What was the avalanche forecast telling me that the problems were starting? And what angle is the slope that I'm kind of potentially venturing onto? And with that, ask yourself 3 questions. What's the problem? And that could be a number of things. It could be, it's an avalanche problem. Is it an associated avalanche hazard, like a cornice buildup? Am I venturing into more complex avalanche terrain? Am I the problem? Did I leave the house late? You know, I'm feeling a bit groggy, or, you know, the plans have changed, I'm a bit stressed. Where's the problem? You know, so that kind of relates to above the 3 A's as well. Is there somebody as well on a slope higher above me that I'm potentially in harm's way? Am I like kind of in the run out zone or the deposition zone of avalanche territory? And then, you know, what should I do about the problem? If I ever recognized that there is a problem, am I just going to stand there and look at the problem and hope it goes away? Or am I going to act and actually reduce the angle, so I'm not putting myself onto a 30-degree slope? I might stay at a lower altitude, and I'm going to change the aspect. You know, for example, if the risk was on a north aspect, I'll move around to the east or plan a journey that I'm on the southerly aspects of a mountain where the risks are really low. So something to bear in mind is the 3 A's and 3 W's. Just keep it really simple and just constantly remind yourself of these things when you're out in the mountains. So if you need more information and you just kind of want more reminders on other things that we maybe haven't discussed this evening, our YouTube channel has really good short little videos about planning and what kit to take whilst you're up in the mountains. So they're kind of worth watching as well, and they're available for all to watch. And that's it. Thank you very much. I hope that it was of use and you enjoyed it. And if you've learned one wee piece of information, then that's great. If you've learned loads, or it's been just a nice healthy reminder, then great. So if you have any questions to ask, then please fire away, and we'll do my best to answer a few of them now. Oh, so somebody's asked me how I cope with glasses in winter. I actually wear contact lenses in winter, and find they work pretty well. You know, I've never had an issue. Somebody's asked about the contour trick with Harvey's maps. So on a Harvey's map, if you look very closely, when contour lines, they're kind of a light brown, and you sometimes get where it changes to like a gray, and then it might change back to that brown color. So in those changes where it's gray, it indicates rocky, steep ground, which would then sort of give you an indication of, you know, getting into that 30-degree slope. Somebody was asking about the emergency texting service again. So all you have to do there to register your phone with the police is just literally text the word register to 999 and then send, and then you'll receive a prompt just to acknowledge the fact that you're doing it, and then just follow those prompts. It's really quite an easy process. Somebody's asked, would I recommend goggles or glasses? So yeah, clear lens goggles are really useful in the Scottish winter because it's easier to see your map as well when the weather's really bad. If it's really sunny day, I would use sunglasses, but certainly something that's going to give myself good protection so I don't really get much glare from the sun. So it really depends on what the weather's doing. Oh, so somebody's asking about bringing dogs into the mountains. So I was out on a winter skills course this weekend, and I brought my wee dog, Brea. She's a lab collie mix. And yeah, she did really well, and she loves the mountains. I know some people bring dogs maybe that have got more hair or longer hair, and it can ball up sometimes, especially in their pads and their paws. I know folk you can buy like kind of cream and things to put in the dog's paws to help prevent snowballing up. And certainly I would think about buying a good quality jacket for the dog, just to kind of give them that extra, you know, extra insulation. And if you have any doubt on taking your dog out in the hills, would maybe start off not being too ambitious and do a hill that's easy for the both of you, but with, you know, in wintry conditions, just to get a feel for it. And then once you feel that it's okay, you can maybe start to think about doing those bigger adventurous days. Somebody's asked about head torches, compatible head torches, spare battery and cable. Yeah, so I would carry a USB rechargeable head torch, and yeah, maybe a battery pack to give it a wee charge and boost, and certainly for my phone as well. But I wouldn't carry a big spare charger, just enough to give it a wee boost, and keep it kind of close to my chest, just to keep the battery warm, or keep it more internally in your rucksack rather than the rucksack lid where it's more exposed to the cold. Somebody's asked about rucksack size. Yeah, I'd say for a mountaineering style rucksack, you know, 25 to 30 liters is a good size rucksack. You know, anything bigger than that, I think sometimes it kind of forces you to want to carry more, and you end up carrying, you know, things that would be a bit more of a luxury rather than essential, and you end up just carrying a really heavy rucksack for no reason. So having a slightly smaller rucksack challenges you more to think about what's the difference between absolutely essential and luxury that you might not necessarily need. Somebody's asked about what 3 words. My personal view on what 3 words is that it's a useful thing if you're looking for somebody's house, if you're a taxi driver or a Deliveroo driver, because it helps to pinpoint a small 3 meter square area. And it works kind of in that urban environment where you can use Google Maps along with it, where in the mountains, using what 3 words, it doesn't give you any, doesn't kind of overlay on top of an Ordnance Survey map. But speaking with Mountain Rescue about this, they were saying that if they get that, they will take what they get and will work with it. But a 6-figure grid reference is going to be the preferred choice because it has worked for years, and they can transfer that onto a map instantly. The other thing with what 3 words is that words can be syllabled, pluraled, and can get sort of lost in translation if you're trying to relay it over a phone call, where numbers, apart from the number 7, every single number is all singular, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's easier to relay a number rather than a word. So, folks, I think we'll leave it there for tonight. So thank you very much for coming along. There's lots of really good questions here. So what we'll do with these questions is we'll gather the questions from last week and tonight, put them all together, and then my homework will be to answer them all as best I can, and then we'll put those answers out onto social media in the days to come. So again, thank you so much for coming along. I hope it was useful, and hope to see you out in the hills, and yeah, stay safe out there. So thank you very much.